talk about two songs about utopias and what they show us about two sometimes very different groups of people. The right and left often hold polar opposite ideas about how we go about improving the world, and sometimes even what we think about the nature of humanity. And you can see that dynamic play out most in the contrast between two songs often played at funerals: John Lennon's Imagine and John Newton's Amazing Grace. I was watching Jimmy Carter's funeral a while back and was surprised to see Imagine performed at the funeral. They also played Amazing Grace later on, but I was confused to see Imagine played at all. Was this just like a favorite song of Jimmy Carter's, or is this a growing trend that I hadn't seen? So I dug into it, and it turns out the song is getting played more and more at the end of people's lives, particularly among groups that lean more left. And I think we're the truest versions of ourselves when we're at a low point, like when we're grieving, which makes it all the more interesting to look at what kinds of ideas another person turns to when they're at their lowest. John Lennon's Imagine is basically the anthem of the leftist perspective. Picture a world where borders, religion, and possessions don't exist, and all conflict disappears. The entire ethos is self-driven, implying that human nature can transcend its flaws if we simply remove the obstacles and the systems in our way. He says, "You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one." It's perhaps the most utopian line in the song. Throughout the entire thing, he's encouraging us, telling us that it's actually easy to do these things if we can just change our minds and change the minds of those around us. Things could be perfect here and now. John Newton takes a very different approach. He instead imagines the day the earth and sun are no more, and imagines the comfort that God's grace will give to him when his mortal life is over. Amazing Grace acknowledges the fundamental shortcomings of humanity. He even says that he himself is a wretch like me, who couldn't save himself, and gives praise that there's sort of a spiritual way out of his current situation. Amazing grace given by God. Towards the end, he also describes a utopia. "When this flesh and heart shall fail, and mortal life shall cease, I shall possess within the veil a life of joy and peace." The veil in this case is that boundary between heaven and earth. He's saying, once I leave this life full of broken and blinded people like myself, God's grace will offer all of us a paradise in the life beyond. And I'm not really content to say that this is comparing like politics and religion and extrapolating inappropriately, because ironically, in their quest towards a more perfect world, the left often mirrors the structure of organized religion. Protests become like this communal worship service that everybody goes to. The state, when aligned with those values, acts like a church to endorse them. It's a structure that goes against everything the left claims to oppose, even including the shame of sins and heresies if you don't align with that dogma. What I'm saying is, leftism may not be a religion, but it often functions like one, or at least mirrors the patterns for people internally, including that aspiration to utopia. And if we distill it down, the path to utopia for Lennon is a personal changing of thought, a systematic dismantling of oppressive systems, and a collective action of coming together. Meanwhile, the right, which skews towards the more historical style of religion, argues that despite our best efforts, the world can't be fully healed due to our underlying nature, which is broken. Only God can fully heal us, and before the day, he says, the earth dissolves like snow, that's really only possible on an individual level. The argument here is to accept grace, improve yourself, and wait for God to finish the job for everybody else, which would make you think that the religious would be kind of lame ducks as government makers. But if we look throughout history, democracy itself came out of the idea of God-given rights. Even more recently, abolitionists and civil rights leaders, nearly all of our country's historical heroes were religious, and they still created massive social and political progress that made life better here and now. Critics of conservative thought often charge it with being outdated or lacking compassion. But if that compassion is blind to humanity's flawed nature, it risks creating overbearing policies that backfire. The left's perpetual promise of a top-down transformation overlooks the fact that systems are only as good as the people who run them. Ultimately, the choice lies between believing we can craft heaven on earth by our own efforts, or recognizing that our deepest issues run beyond political solutions. Honestly, I think genuine progress calls for a humbler perspective. One that doesn't disregard science or activism, but one that also doesn't expect to redeem humanity from within a system. We can strive for better laws and more just societies without deluding ourselves that utopia is just a couple more policies away. History teaches that lasting change emerges when we truly confront our own moral limits and choose together to reach beyond them to something higher. So maybe we can acknowledge that we all need a little grace and imagine a better future together. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like on this video and subscribe to see what we've got coming next week.